Welcome to the Pink Tax Podcast, a no-nonsense podcast for millennial women, building wealth and smashing the patriarchy, $1 at a time, with your hosts, Janine and Tara.
Hey, Tara.
Hi, Janine.
How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. I think what I've seen in the news this week, or I guess over the past few months, is what we're going to be talking about today, and that's around the cost of actually living in the northern part of Canada. And one of the interesting articles that I found, it was from a couple of years ago, but none of it is actually growing faster in the past couple of years than many of the other provinces and territories across Canada.
Yeah, it seems like there's not just like an interest in living there. Like obviously people have been living there for a long time. But it does seem like they've got a little bit more industry picking up there. I know across the north since 2008, some of the industry has left in terms of like oil and gas and mining, but it seems like there might be some new entrepreneurs getting up there, and some different, industry and business and revenue generation coming from Canada's north, which is kind of interesting.
Well, and I think also a statistic I found really interesting was that the fertility rate in Nunavut is actually 2.9 as opposed to the national average of 1.6.
Whoa, that's cool.
So there's lots of babies being born up there as well.
That's so cool.
Have you ever been to Nunavut or any of the territories up there?
No, but I would love to. I've always wanted to go, so this is the other side of Canada, but I guess like always living on the other side of Canada, I've always kind of wanted to go up to the Yukon and see how it is, especially in like the summer.
Yeah.
It's just, supposed to be beautiful, and anyone who's kind of gone on a trip up that way for hiking or even gone like on an Arctic cruise has just said it's absolutely stunning.
Yeah, my in-laws went a couple of years ago. I haven't made it up north yet, but they said it was so beautiful and they loved it.
Yeah. It is more expensive to live there, though, which doesn't really seem great. So I was wanting to talk about that today. Like, we talk about the pink tax a lot and how ladies are charged more for basic everyday things that we need to survive. But then we also see that happening just kind of as soon as you cross, I think it's called like north of 60, but even like Nunavut is below the 60th parallel. So it just kind of seems like once you get into a northern province, northern territory of Canada, the increase in prices just go through the roof for basic needs.
Yeah, and I know here in Alberta, Fort McMurray definitely sees some of those, not to the same extent as living in the north, but they definitely see an increase in some of those costs. And I know I've probably sent you a couple articles, and I know you were doing some research, but one of the things, being 30 weeks pregnant, I'm eating a lot of ice cream, and I looked up how much ice cream, like a pint of ice cream costs in the north, and it's $12 for a pint of ice cream up there.
That's not
fair to pregnant women.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking like that's more expensive than my, lactose-free stuff has ever been. I don't think in my life have I paid $12 for a pint of ice cream.
And what else I found in this article was peanut butter was $14, a medium container, and some smaller communities have reported that watermelons have gone for as much as $70.
That's insane. Well, and like I think at a certain point, like why would you even bring it in? So when I was looking at the reports, it's like you can expect to pay on average, like across all products, 2 to 3 times as much as you would pay in southern Canada at any point. And yeah, a lot of it has to do with shipping and keeping the produce and the goods, you know, cold and or just, you know, like not rotten by the time they get there. But then if you know that they're going to have a shorter shelf life, it's harder to get them out there. Like if you're going to price a watermelon at $70, do you think anyone buys it? Like how much of this stuff just gets thrown out also?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know when we were traveling to Iceland, obviously not the same, but similar in that everything kind of has to be shipped in from a long distance. I remember in the grocery stores, like mango, like a small mango was like $9. And I just, again, from like that perspective, like who is paying that? Like I'm not talking like a big, beautiful mango. I'm talking like it was smaller than my fist for sure.
Well, and okay, so this got me thinking about like food distribution and kind of how this whole thing works. So I'll pay like 71 cents a pound for bananas, right? But I'll pay, and those are not from Canada, obviously. No one here is growing bananas. They are from somewhere closer to the equator, right? Apples. You can get apples from BC and you're going to pay over $1 a pound. So, like, I'm confused. Like, is this a labor thing as well? Like, are we just, like, super, underpricing labor in certain areas, countries, and what have you? And then, I don't know if it's just, like, there's, like, sort of, like, this extra jump to get a little bit farther north, where it's like, okay, now it's no longer profitable, so for me to make, like, the same profit on the sale of a mango, I now have to increase it by like 2 or 3 times the price, which to me doesn't really make sense even from a business perspective. Like if I was going into the grocery business and was like, okay, I can make a 20% profit in southern Canada, but I would have to overprice it to the point of like throwing out food in northern Canada. Maybe I just like take the hit on my store in northern Canada and only make a 5% profit and then continue to make the 20% in southern Canada. Do you get my meaning?
Yeah, like I'm not sure I buy it that it costs that much to ship a watermelon up there. It feels like price gouging going on against, in most cases, probably indigenous communities.
Yeah, and so like I looked at a couple of studies and I'm going to link them there, and it says, oh, you know, profit is not a factor. So I'm guessing that is to say, like, it is not as profitable to have a shop in anywhere in northern Canada. But that being said, if you're still having the expectation of having the same margin, that does lead to gouging. Like, it's still there. The other thing it had me thinking about, do you remember those pictures that came out at the start of the pandemic of like those big, like, they were like dumps, like somebody dug a huge hole in the ground and just dumped a bunch of potatoes in there because the restaurants weren't buying the potatoes. So rather than let the price of potatoes fall, so to kind of support the price of potatoes, they just dumped the excess.
That's so wasteful.
Yeah, and it was done with milk, it was done with potatoes, it was done with a ton of different crops that are pretty popular from restaurants and larger purchasers. That being said, like, we know that there's a ton of waste from grocery stores. We know that there's a ton of waste from restaurants. And we know that there's milk dumping happening all the time to support the price of milk. So, like, how is this translating to the north? Like, I just don't understand. Help me understand, Janine. What do you think is going on here?
You know, I don't know a ton about food dumping. I obviously know it happens, but what it seems like to me is that yeah, there are businesses that are wanting to make as much money as they possibly can, and whether that means they're dumping food so that they can maintain the prices, or if they're just gouging communities that don't have any other means of getting food there. Because realistically, when you look at it, if you live in a small desolate community up north, a plane is coming like once a week.
Yeah, and some folks only have access to the roads in the summer. And there are, more affluent people there, or like higher middle income, or just people who can afford, to travel down south 2 or 3 times a year, and they go with coolers and are able to somehow, and this is what really I don't understand how a business couldn't do this then. If it's cheaper for an individual family to book a flight down to Ontario, or if you're in the Yukon, book a flight down to BC, go to a national chain retailer, fill up a bunch of coolers, and then ship them back to your province of origin, somewhere in northern Canada. How is it cheaper for one individual family to do that 2 or 3 times a year to feed themselves than it is for a business to truck in food? Like, isn't it supposed to be cheaper for the business to truck in food? Wouldn't they be able to negotiate the shipping costs? Like, something does not track here.
Yeah, I think like ultimately what it comes down to is there's going to need to be some policy put in place. Just reading through some of these articles about food insecurity up in the north, there's some families that are 4 people or maybe 5, and they're spending, $400 a week on groceries. So, I mean, obviously it depends on the age of your kids, but that seems, and that's like a small budget. So, I think like there's probably people spending a lot more on food. And what kind of even threw me further was the fact that like baby formula is costing some families like $52 a week. And as like a future mom, I'm just like, how are we doing that to women and families that are lower income, or not even lower income, just families that live in more, I guess, desolate or far away or removed communities? Like, why are we not capping some of these goods? And are we gouging on like nutritious foods and then saying, well, a box of Captain Crunch is still the same price? That's, what I'm also wondering is, what portion of like junk food is getting subsidized in a way by these companies so that people will just buy more of it.
Yeah, and about the baby formula, I was listening to that CBC show, The Cost of Living, which, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't be promoting them here, but it's a really great show, and gives little like tidbits of information on kind of the same thing that we talk about. They talked about baby formula, and they talked about it basically being a monopoly. There are not many producers for it, and also like it never goes on sale, because it's something that you cannot really negotiate. So there's very little elasticity in the price, right?
I remember this from Econ 101 or whatever, and the example that was used there was it was insulin. So baby formula would kind of be very, very similar in that case, right? Like no matter what the price is, you're still going to pay for it.
Exactly. And I'm wondering how much of this is happening to, our northern neighbors, where folks are going in there and saying, I know that's like, we'll never discount the price of apples. We will never discount the price of watermelon. We'll never discount the price of things that are healthy, are really non-negotiable because they're food, don't have a high or a long shelf-stable life, and do have to be shipped in. So we can discount the Captain Crunch because you might get somebody who is going to pick it up on an impulse buy. But if you're talking about something like your whole wheat breads and your apples and your cucumbers and the things that are healthy and that you actually need to live, I would like to know how often those items go on sale in the north.
I'm further reading this in the same article, and they're seeing obviously a high percentage of food insecurity in many of these northern communities, much, much higher than the average in Canada. But then they're also seeing things like nutritional rickets or tooth decay, right? And if we think about then taking that one step further, while we have universal healthcare, it definitely doesn't cover the dentist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if you're already going to be paying like 2 or 3 times as much on your groceries, and then we'll get into the other things that are more expensive up there too, you don't have a lot left over to spend at the dentist. And
does anyone have anything left over to spend at the dentist? Because I'm just going to say, every time I go there, it's like at least $500.
I love my dentist. Great human. Very expensive. And for my particular plan, it's not direct billed. So it's fine because I get charged and then I basically get 80% of it back in a couple of days. But if I didn't have that room on my credit card, it could be a lot more painful. If I lose my insurance, we're just not going to go, obviously. We can't afford it. When you move to a work-based insurance model, you lose a lot of people because they have to wait until, I don't know, they have a tooth abscess, or if you look to our southern neighbors, you've got people who will just not be able to take care of themselves in any sort of kind of preventative health they won't be able to do any sort of preventative health to take care of themselves, and will end up, having very high cost surgeries that here we can prevent through, it's not great, but it's at least a little bit better in that it's not fully 2-tier yet. Anyway.
I think you were saying before we kind of hit the record button, there is a lack of, I'm sure, dentists up in the north, but physicians as well.
Yeah, it's something like 25% of communities, I believe it was in Nunavut, don't have access to a physician in their area, and they also don't have access to a bank. So we're not really providing the same level of service that we would provide in the South. And I've got to say that speaks a lot to profit incentives to me. If we are trying to leave it up to individuals or businesses to move up there and provide these services when they know they're not going to make the same profit margin, they're not going to go. So we have to do something to provide that incentive if we truly believe that everyone has a right to healthcare, which I do.
Or food.
And food, exactly. Right? So I think this is something that needs to be worked on. And I mean, there are food subsidies now, but they're going to the retailers. And I don't love it.
I don't like that because I feel like, how do we mandate that they're passing all of that on to the consumer?
Exactly. And I remember thinking about this when it came to that, what was it called? The recreation subsidy that we used to have here.
Mm-hmm.
And dance was still very expensive for children. It didn't really do anything. It was almost like the prices were raised to kind of account for that. So I don't think that it helped that many more people get into sports, or any kids get into
well, the credit was a joke.
Yeah.
You can claim up to $1,000, which anyone who's in a very competitive sport knows you pay more than $1,000. But then you only got 15% of that as a credit. And I was gonna say I'm not 100% sure on all the food subsidies, but I know there's that northern residents tax credit or whatever on the tax returns. But again, tax credits only help people who pay taxes, which means you have to be of a certain income bracket.
Yeah, and you have to pay that all out of pocket first. So if you don't have the money in the first place, that 15% isn't really going to make a difference to you if you can never claim it.
Exactly.
Like if you don't have the ability to cut a check up front, or you don't have room on your credit card, it's not going to happen. And in this case, you're going to starve. It's not that you're not going to play soccer at 4 years old. You're literally going to starve.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure there's been studies on this, but like, what does food insecurity do to children psychologically?
Yeah. And well, one of the things I saw is that in Northern Canada, the life expectancy is 10 years lower than us folks here in the South. There's a lot going on. I didn't look up the suicide rates, but I have a feeling there's, as we've seen in certain pockets of Canada, there are higher suicide rates. Those also happen to be the places where you don't have access to doctors, you don't have access to food, you don't have access to the same things that are our basic needs to survive as people. And that does something to you psychologically. It for sure does.
Well, and who are we to say, again, I always come back to this, like, who are we to say one group of people or one person is more valuable than another, right? Like, that's really what it comes down to. If we're going to say we don't believe in making it so that preschoolers or kindergarten kids are starving when they get to school, so we're going to provide affordable, healthy eating for all of those kids, it can't just be only for the white kids that live in, Edmonton and Calgary or whatever.
Yeah. And I mean, and coming up to the issue of race as well, like there's a lot of Indigenous folks that live up there. And the thing is, before colonization and everything like that, these folks were doing just fine. Like, I have to be very clear about this. This is a problem that is recent and has been created by modern society.
So why do you think that is, in terms of, I guess I'm going more towards the fact that I'm pretty sure, and correct me if I'm wrong, but some of those northern communities aren't great for growing.
No, fair, for sure. But when we think about things like, and I know it's like a big deal with like the seal hunt and stuff like that, and I am a recovering vegan, so like I get it, they're cute. That said, they're a traditional source of food. We've seen a depletion in traditional food sources when it comes to traditional hunting in Indigenous communities. Some of it has to do with climate change. Some of it has to do with there were methods of forced starvation here when the original Europeans were colonizing everything. And white folks hunted stuff too. Hunted some of these animals, to the brink of extinction. So if you go into a new territory, and I kind of explained it to my kid like this when they asked about New Brunswick and like, was it new? And I was, well, it's new to somebody. It's kind of like you go over to somebody's house, like raid their fridge, and then just like F off basically, and ensure that they like don't get hired, they don't have another means of getting money to then restock their fridge. Like it's basically the same thing. It's dick move. Like, yeah, it's been hundreds of years, but like it's a super dick move. A lot of the traditional agriculture and the traditional hunting sources, like they're just gone basically.
Yeah, that's definitely a big problem and is frustrating, and it kind of forces them to follow, I guess, like white people's way of life in another sense.
Yeah, and then we're kind of restricting their access to that too. We're like, oh, well, if you want to eat the standard American diet, like you have to pay 3 times more than somebody living in southern Canada. That's also not great from like a racialized colonial perspective. As a settler person, this is just what I'm seeing. I have like no actual knowledge of this firsthand or I mean honestly even secondhand, but from what I've read in some of these reports and stuff that I was going through, that's the sense I got. I mean, I haven't lived it, but I was like, whew, that does not look good.
Well, and I'm sure the income does not match what these people are having to pay. Like, I'm sure they're not being paid 3 times as much as we are here in southern Canada. And I think that, you know, kind of ties in nicely to our conversations these past few weeks about universal basic income and how it needs to be based on location.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing though, too. So I looked up the median incomes, and across the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, you actually do see like there's an increase somewhere between, so the median income for Canada is like $61,000 for a household in 2018. Across like northern Canada, it's somewhere between 74,000 and like 100,000. So there is a higher median income. That's not to say there aren't poor people. There's poor people everywhere that don't need to spend $70 for a watermelon, okay? Also, the cost of everything else has increased too. So even though you might have a higher income, if you're spending 3 times more, and this is even on the highest end, it's only an increase of 2 times the average Canadian income, right? But if you're spending 3 times more on literally everything, you're still in the hole.
Well, and yeah, so okay, it's $15,000 to $25,000 or $30,000 more a year. That's not 3 times more, right?
No, it's not. It doesn't match the expenses, right? So for other things that are way more expensive up north than they are in southern Canada, we also see internet access. So
Ooh, that's a good
do you know
one.
offhand? Yeah. Do you know offhand how much you pay for internet?
I think we pay $65 a month.
Okay. I have no idea what we pay, to be totally honest with you. It's more than $60. We're supposed to have really great access, and like I'm still not happy. Like, I feel like we pay a lot. We're supposed to have top tier uploads, downloads, all the things. And like, it's spotty as hell.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I think we're supposed to have pretty good internet. And I find if I'm not plugged in sitting beside the router, then
yeah,
c'est la vie.
So that's here in a major city in southern Canada. I looked it up, and like across Canada, folks are paying like for internet access, Wi-Fi, all the things. I assume like a cable package based on the year I looked up, like $190 on average. Up north, the average goes up to $220. So you can expect to pay, let's say, 15 to 20% more for access. But what does that access actually look like? There's really no fiber optics up there. There was a recent plan to get fiber optic cable underwater from Greenland, I think, to Nunavut. And it's going to cost like, it just keeps getting more expensive. It's like $220 million to do this thing now. So a lot of it's like reliant on satellites. There's not a hell of a lot of towers in terms of like cell phone access and stuff like that. So I can't imagine their service is great. And anecdotally, I haven't heard anything. Have you looked into this internet, cell phone, data stuff at all?
You know, I haven't, but just from like the drive between Calgary and like Kelowna, I can tell you that the service is shit for more than 50% of it. And sometimes I lose service when I drive from Edmonton to Calgary. So I can't imagine it's better than what we have here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not. And and then you're paying more for it. So you can do less and you pay more. And now we're getting closer and closer to the point, if we haven't already passed it, where access to a proper internet connection is, again, kind of a basic human right. It's a need.
It is, actually. I believe it. I think the UN put access to internet as a human right on the list of the things. I don't know what it's called, but
yeah. And that was That's come up a lot in Indigenous issues. We're not doing great. I don't think that what white Canada thinks Canada is actually what Canada is. And like, yeah, there are some hard truths that I think people need to acclimatize themselves to, I guess. But anyway, I digress. The internet's shitty and it costs more. So you might make more, but you have less access, you have less contact with the rest of Canada, and you pay 15 to 20% more. If you have an increased income there, it's still not going to cover it.
I'm sure that goes for our utilities. We talked about groceries, obviously internet, I would assume rent. It's like all of the things you need, clothing, right, are going to be just that much more expensive, and the income doesn't match.
And I just kept thinking every time I read this stuff, like how often, you know, I switch service providers because I'm upset about the level of service that I'm getting for the amount that I'm paying. I'm that person. I try not to be upset with the customer service person. It's not their fault, obviously. I just like a good deal. If I moved up north, I mean, I would just be the worst human, I think, for a little while. I'd be so angry. If I wanted watermelon and it's $70.
Well, you just have no other options at that point, right?
No. Like, you like searching for signal, the amount of times like I want to throw out my modem here. I couldn't imagine if I was paying 20% more than what I have now for lower service.
Well, and if we think about it too in terms of the global pandemic that we're in, we're seeing more jobs go remote and go online. How does that impact those communities who have terrible internet connections or have no internet connections or whatever the situation is? I mean, we've all seen it here in major cities where you can kind of tell at the beginning of the pandemic when everyone was working from home that everyone's home internet was just really, really terrible because they were used to having all of their internet connections being leveraged in office space. So, you know, what does that look like for someone living and now trying to work remotely in the north?
Yeah, and anecdotally, I've heard that the major, let's say, like mining companies, like the big industries up north, the company itself has fantastic internet access.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. And it's like, you may not use your employer's internet access to stream Netflix.
Okay, but
that's like a thing.
I like do and need to.
I feel like everyone here does. Like everybody has watched, you know, a video at work on your coffee break using the company internet.
YouTube,
like it has
or
happened.
Whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, you wouldn't even be able to like send your coworker. I mean, I guess if you work for one of like the bigger industries, you could while at work, like you could send some funny GIFs or videos or whatever. But like as soon as you're off the clock, you're like, no more. And also your boss told you not to. Like it's just weird.
Well, and then does that kind of go into like, I mean, we all, you know, check our banking at work or whatever. Like what things are they not allowed to use their employer's internet for?
Yeah. And how does that work too if like a bunch of folks don't have a local bank, so you have to like drive to a branch, and then you also don't have access to proper online banking?
Yeah.
I feel like I kind of need to go up there and like live for a bit to like truly understand the frustration but thinking about it now, I'm very frustrated.
Well, I'm thinking through, you know, it's not just one thing. It's like, how does that one thing affect all of these other things that we didn't even think about? Like, I didn't expect to talk about internet or, you know, COVID in relation to this, but, you know, it all ties in.
Yeah, I mean, your life isn't based around one aspect of anything, right? Your access to food or healthcare or internet, the effects that your employment have had on COVID, like, you can't compartmentalize your body, you know? And I don't even think people can really compartmentalize their lives or their minds as much as some folks say you can. It's all going to bleed into each other. If
you have a bad mental state or mental health, because you can't put food on the table for your family, you're not going to show up to work to do and be your best self, right? Like, you just
No,
can't.
definitely not. No, you for sure can't. And I don't think that should be an expectation of anyone either.
Oh, agreed, but I'm sure it is.
Okay, here's another thing that, like, blew my Southern Canada mind. Like, absolutely. You pay property taxes, I pay property taxes. How often do you look on your property tax bill and figure out how much, like, water cost you, or like waste removal, like garbage and compost and all those things?
I don't.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-oh. Should I?
I don't think so. It comes up like every time there's an election. It's like, I pay $10 to have my trash removed. We should make this private. Don't make it private. That's super cheap. Definitely keep that. It's a fine service. Pay the union garbage people to come pick up your stuff. $6 is nothing, because there are some communities that are on trucked water. So that's like the water does not come from the pipes drinkable to your taps. It's trucked into your community.
Oh boy.
And then you pay $146 a month for it.
Oh my God. How is that legal?
Okay, this is another thing that I don't know, because I know that we have different government acts at the federal level to kind of prevent against this kind of stuff. So I'm thinking about the Health Act, where, we all pay our income taxes. We give it to the federal government. They give it back to the provinces, and they say everybody in Canada should have equal, universal access to healthcare. And it should look the same. It should be like the McDonald's of healthcare. You should, if you go to a physician in the Yukon, you get the same service as a physician in Medicine Hat. It shouldn't be different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't water be the same? Like, if I have to pay $146 a month for water and I can't afford it, I'm not going to live long enough to see a physician.
Yeah, water's a pretty basic need.
Right? Like, we don't, and then we have like the Education Act. So then we pay our income taxes through equalization, or TFF. This stuff comes back to us. We pay for post-secondary. There's also the Education Act to pay for primary to secondary education levels. And it, again, should kind of be the same. There'll be some regional difference, but we should have access to basic things. Why is water not included? How the hell did we miss that?
I don't have an answer for you, because that is the first I'm hearing of it, which is terrible to say, but like, I'm sure there's a lot of people that don't know this.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like, how many communities are still on boil water advisories and have been for a generation?
Yeah.
Could you imagine growing up and never having to not boil water to drink it?
Yeah, like, we live in Canada, not like a third world country. Although, I mean, you see it in the US, right? Like, you always hear like Flint doesn't have clean water still. And it's like, well, we still have places in Canada where there's literally boil water advisories. So
yeah. And this is the thing, like, Flint is a really good example of this being kind of self-made as well. And here, it feels very self-made. How did we get the infrastructure to deliver clean drinking water to Montreal, but not to Nunavut? Like, it's not that far away.
yeah.
So what the hell? And also, like, how did we say that, like, oh yeah, you should be able to see a doctor, but food is not a thing? Like, what did we think that we were gonna... I don't understand. I really can't get past it. Like, you have to eat and have water before you can go to a doctor.
Totally. Because, like, seeing a physician also in that, like, think about all the costs that are associated with that, as opposed to just, like, what it would have cost us as a society to make sure everyone has fresh fruits and vegetables.
Yeah, it seems weird. it seems very, very, very strange. And I'll link it in the notes, but there are a few organizations down here in southern Canada that take food from grocery stores that are about to expire or expired or whatever, and basically like rescue them and then redistribute them.
Okay.
The thing that gets me though is that like somebody still has to pay for it, which if no one does that, they just like throw it out in the dumpster, which is really weird. But there's a lot of food waste like down in southern Canada, which I feel if we just like distributed the food properly, we wouldn't have to throw out so much here.
Yeah. There's got to be like flights and vehicles going up there on a regular basis to redistribute this stuff.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is there are flights, there are vehicles, they're just going up there for different reasons and like not bringing food. Or the food that they do bring is like extra pricey.
Jeez.
Yeah. I don't know. So now I don't know if I'm crazy, but yeah, maybe do you want to bring it back to the point? Because now I'm just like very angry.
No, fair enough. I guess like in closing this episode, I feel like what this episode was more of, something or a conversation to bring awareness to some of this stuff, because I think we saw some price gouging at the beginning of COVID around, things like toilet paper and hand sanitizer. And we were all outraged about that, and it's illegal and people were fined and all of that. But I think sometimes we forget about our northern communities that deal with this on an everyday basis. And so when we talk about, food security for all, or universal health care for all, or a universal basic income for all, it really does need to be for all and not just, white metropolitan areas in Canada.
Yeah. And I think the next time you feel like complaining about your income tax, equalization payments, or the cost of like waste removal in your city, like
don't
calm down.
Look up the statistics for none of it.
Yeah, calm down, be grateful, pay your taxes.
Exactly. And that can be the pink tax rebate.
Yeah.
Gone, thought I lost my mind. Creature without a spine. Took back what should be mine. Thrown in the deep end. Trouble, I gained a voice. I'm not your shiny toy. Left me without a choice. What were you thinking? Dig my grave. Take my blame. There's no love lost when I'm the strong one. Never change. Run astray. There's no love lost when you're the wrong one. I'll never be the same.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Let us know what you think on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The Pink Tax Podcast is recorded in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta.
Our music is provided by Margot. You can find her work at noisebymargot.com. Sound editing by Peter Dobson. If you'd like to support the Pink Tax Podcast, you can make a donation at liberapay.com/pinktaxpodcast and submit a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts.